are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Any recorded vote on the postponed question will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S-2082, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorities Act of 2015.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 2082, an act to amend Title 38, United States Code to extend certain expiring provisions of law administered by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Brown, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks on Senate 2082.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, which is sponsored by our Senate colleague, Senator Isaacson, chairman of the Senate VA Committee, would extend a number of expiring current authorities in critical programs at both the Department of Veterans Affairs and at the Department of Labor. These include extensions for veterans health care and homeless programs, benefits for disabled veterans, vocational rehabilitation programs for service members and veterans, home loan programs, and a variety of advisory committees, pilot programs, and medical facility projects. Absent passage of this legislation today, these important and non-controversial authorizations and programs are set to expire at the end of this fiscal or calendar year. These are not new programs, and the costs have either been fully offset or have been assumed in the baseline budget for fiscal year 2016. And furthermore, both the majority and minority of the House and Senate Committees on Veterans Affairs have worked on this language and agreed on the need to extend all of these programs. In addition to the extension that is included, this bill also contains language that would increase the total authorization for the Denver Replacement Medical Center project to $1,675 billion. This is an increase of $625 million above the amounts that have previously been authorized for this project. To ensure that the many egregious mistakes that VA has made in Denver are not repeated in the future, this bill would put into place initial reforms for managing the most expensive VA construction projects. Namely, these reforms include creating a new classification category called a super construction project. Now, a super construction project would be defined as the construction, alteration, or acquisition of a VA medical facility involving the total expenditure of more than $100 million. And each super construction project would be managed not by VA, but instead by a non-department federal entity such as the Army Corps of Engineers. Importantly, the bill would classify the Denver project as a super construction project. And while I'm supportive of the provisions of this bill up to this point, I vehemently oppose and disagree with the Department's proposal to cover some of the increased costs of the Denver project. This bill could allow VA to proceed with the Department's proposed plan to use $200 million in offsets from the medical services account and through delayed activations of other construction projects. Mr. Speaker, to understand the magnitude of the management incompetence at the Department of Veterans Affairs as it relates to construction, I think a little history is in order. The replacement of the existing Denver VA Medical Center began as a discussion item back in 1999. The project was first envisioned as a shared facility on the former Fitzsimmons Army Base in Aurora, Colorado. The initial estimate for a shared facility was $328 million. After undergoing numerous scope changes over a period of several years, VA requested appropriations in 2010 for a standalone medical center replacement with a total estimated cost of $800 million. However, in December of last year, with less than 50% of the facility complete and staring down the $800 million authorization cap, the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals found VA to be in breach of its contract with its general contractor, Kiewit Turner. As a result, VA had no choice but to come to Congress and finally admit the severity of the mismanagement and the cost and schedule overruns that have come to characterize the Denver project. In June, following an assessment to determine the probable cost of completing the project, the Army Corps of Engineers provided the final total required to finish the Denver project, $1,675,000. Several weeks ago, VA provided the committee with their plan as to what budget resources would be made available to fund the remaining dollars necessary for this project. This bill assumes that VA's plan is an appropriate way to move forward on this project. VA first proposes to use $100 million in offsets derived from the higher than budgeted medical collections VA expects it will receive in fiscal year 2015 and 2016. Under law, VA medical care collection funds are retained by VA medical facilities to supplement their budgets to care for veterans. Thus, their proposed offset actually reduces VA's medical care budget by $100 million in fiscal year 2016 to partially fund the remainder of the Denver project. I would have reservations about reducing VA's medical care budget in any year. But I'm particularly concerned this year because just a few weeks ago, I'm sure the members will recall that VA sounded the alarm that the funds budgeted for hepatitis C medications and care in the community for fiscal year 2016 are short. VA also stated that they would need to shut down the whole hospital system. The whole hospital system would have to be shut down if additional funds for fiscal year 2015 were not provided. As a result, Congress met VA's 11th hour plea with an additional $3.34 billion to ensure that veterans were not denied the care that they had earned. Obviously, VA's proposal to cut medical care funds to complete the Denver replacement hospital, when the public record clearly reflects VA's previous testimony over lack of funding in the medical care account, is entirely inconsistent and inappropriate. Frankly, it borders on an attempt to mislead this Congress. Secondly, VA proposes to use $100 million in offsets derived from reductions in construction and leasing activation costs due to schedule adjustments associated with several projects. And when I asked what VA's plan was to address the funding for these adjustments, VA's response was this: the department would ensure that they request sufficient activation funding in future budget years to account for the reductions of the other projects. In other words, it's not really an offset. They're going to ask for the money back. So by reducing other projects by $100 million in 1 year only to ask Congress next year for the funds to be replaced strains credibility once again for the Department of Veterans Affairs. This isn't an offset. It's nothing more than a delayed supplemental request. In other words, VA is expecting the taxpayers to bail him out again. To agree to such a tactic would be akin to taking a child's allowance away for misbehavior only to increase it later to make up for the reduction. Offsetting the biggest construction failure in VA's history by cutting money from VA's medical services account and delaying facility activation costs until next year punishes the veterans of this nation and the taxpayers for VA's incompetence. Now, I appreciate the challenge VA has in identifying available money and producing a way ahead for this project that's fair to taxpayers and veterans alike in a tight fiscal environment. However, VA continues to be oblivious to the need to prioritize their spending. For example, as I address this House this afternoon, VA officials from across the country have gathered 40 miles away in Leesburg for a leadership conference that is costing the department $1 million. Now, that may seem like a small amount, but this is in addition to the $33.4 million that VA reported spending on conferences so far through the end of the third quarter of this fiscal year. To repeat, VA has reported spending $33.4 million so far through the end of the third quarter, with at least one and likely several other costly conferences that have yet to be accounted for. What's more, Monday, the VA Inspector General released a report on VA's relocation expenses program, which found that senior Veterans Benefits Administration officials had misused their positions for their own personal and financial benefit. These senior officials engineered the transfers of other senior officials as a way to increase pay for themselves and other senior executive service employees and work around the pay freezes and bans on performance awards for senior leaders. One VBA leader alone received almost $300,000 in relocation expenses when she moved from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia. In total, VBA spent over $1.7 million on reassignment expenses, including almost $1.3 million on relocation expenses for senior executives for fiscal years 13 and 15. And now, yesterday, the VA Office of Inspector General substantiated allegations that the St. Louis VA Healthcare System Mental Health Clinic inappropriately changed the status of mental health consults to complete prior to a provider actually completing the appointment with a patient in 60% of sampled consults. To make matters worse, the IG substantiated that in a review of fiscal year 2013 facility performance pay assessments, 8 full-time outpatient psychiatrists received an average of nearly $14,000 in performance pay. 7 of the 8 psychiatrists met or exceeded the productivity goal, and as a result, each received an average of around $2,900 for proved to be faulty productivity achievements. This is in keeping with the wanton and abusive VA spending practices that the committee has uncovered at VA facilities across our country. For example, the committee recently found that the Palo Alto VA healthcare system has spent at least $6.3 million on art and consulting services. These projects include an art installation on the side of a parking garage that displays quotes by Abraham Lincoln and Eleanor Roosevelt in, wait for it, in Morse code that cost $285,000. It actually lights up. A large rock sculpture and the courtyard in the middle of the mental health center that cost $1.3 million for a rock. A stainless steel and aluminum sculpture in the aquatic center entrance that cost $365,000. Another sculpture that I'm at a loss to describe in an exterior lobby that cost $305,000. A sculpture in the shape of a half arc that is located inside the mental health center that costs $330,000. As many of these projects are not yet complete, these costs actually could increase. Let me be clear. Spending money on conferences and relocation expenses for VA employees and on art installations for VA facilities is not more important than taking care of the veterans of this nation, providing them the health care that they have earned. It is simply beyond me why VA would choose to pay to complete the Denver project by cutting medical services and medical facility dollars, but not the exorbitant conference spending or bloated relocation expenses or art. I remain committed to finding a way forward in Denver, and I'm going to be supporting the bill today. However, I am equally convinced that we must ensure that the offsets that VA uses in Colorado do not come at the expense of VA's most important mission, providing high-quality health care for veterans. And unfortunately, VA's plan offers no assurance. I'm also frustrated that the department's plan that this bill presumes is appropriate offers no measure of accountability for those responsible for allowing this project to balloon out of control. The VA senior executives in charge of the Denver disaster collected massive bonuses as projected costs increased and delays stretched on for years. They've all retired with full retirement benefits. It's inexcusable. To allow rewards, bonuses, and full retirement benefits to be retained even when the facts indicate that an employee has not performed at the level expected is not only wrong, it is blatant and woeful misuse of taxpayer dollars. I've said repeatedly that the great majority of VA employees are hardworking public servants who go to work every day to live up to President Lincoln's words, to provide quality health care and benefits to our nation's veterans. What's more, I believe that the majority of VA employees who are dedicated to the mission and purpose of the department are just as frustrated and demoralized as we are when they see problem employees receiving bonuses or performance awards in spite of poor, unethical, and sometimes illegal job performance. I just wish that this legislation could assure those quality employees that the veterans that they serve, that this Congress and this department are committed to breaking VA's vicious cycle of ignoring and even rewarding poor performance. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, how much time do we have?
The gentlelady has 20 minutes.
And how much time does the chairperson have?
Gentleman from Florida has 4.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in support of Senate 2082, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorization Act of 2015. This bill is an important and necessary bill for us to take up and pass today and send to the President. Let me repeat that. This bill is important and a necessary bill for us to take up and pass today and send to the President. Senate Bill 2082 makes sure that some of the vital programs we have in place to take care of our veterans continue past the end of the fiscal year and continue to help our veterans. I want to highlight just some of those important programs. Senate 2082 ensures that several programs serving the homeless veterans continue, including the homeless veteran and homeless veterans with children reintegration programs. Senate Bill 2082 ensures that there is adequate authorization levels for much-needed assistance and support service for veterans caregivers. Senate Bill 2082 continues a successful pilot program that counsels newly separated women veterans in retreat setting. This is an important program. I have a bill, H.R. 1575, that would take this program permanently and begin to, it has passed the Committee of Veterans Affairs, and I hope it will be brought to the floor soon so that we can vote for it. Senate Bill 2082 also extends the authorization of the National Academy of Science to continue its research into the health consequences of Agent Orange exposure, providing the necessary link for the veterans to make disability presumptions. I am disappointed that the provision mandating the Secretary to make these presumptions is not in the bill, and I know that we will all work together to make sure that the VA does the right thing for our veterans. Senate Bill 2082 extends the authorization for the VA to provide transportation grants for highly rural veterans and the ability of VA to provide transportation to and from VA facilities. This is important to ensure that our veterans have access to care. Senate Bill 2082 extends the authorization of the VA to provide rehabilitation and vocational benefits for our wounded warriors. And finally, Senate Bill 2082 provides for an increase in the authorization level for the Denver Regional VA Medical Center. This center will provide specialty care for all Visitor 19s, which include Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Utah, and Idaho. We need to finish this project and better provide health care for our veterans. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much. I yield to a distinguished member of the committee, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Senate Bill 2082, and I thank Chairman Miller for his efforts to extend authority for various VA health care, benefit, disability, housing, education, job training, and other assistance programs. Part of this bill also ensures that Colorado veterans will receive a completed state-of-the-art new hospital in Denver. In addition to funding the hospital, though, Senate Bill 2082 ensures that the type of construction mismanagement and cost overruns will not happen on future large-scale VA construction programs. The VA has shown us on multiple projects, Denver being unfortunately the largest, that they are not properly equipped to handle these large construction projects with their own in-house capabilities. The bill requires that the Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers, or NAVFAC, or a different construction agency, but not the VA, will take on the task of managing these large construction programs. We must be good stewards of the taxpayers' money and use that money wisely to care for the veterans. This bill is a step in the right direction to get VA construction back on the right path while fulfilling the promise made with the hospital to our nation's veterans. We have a sacred trust to take care of the men and women who have defended our country. Mr. Chairman, Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Yes, sir. I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Nevada, Mrs. Talley.
Gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member for yielding and for her leadership on the VA committee. I rise in reluctant support of this bill, SB 2082, the VA Expiring Authorities Act. As my colleagues have outlined, this legislation will extend authorization for some very good programs at the VA that provide valuable support and service for our nation's heroes. I have serious concerns, however, about one provision included in the bill. Title V raises the authorization for the Denver Medical Facility by more than $600 million. This facility is already $1 billion over budget and years behind schedule. The bill, however, does not explain how we're going to pay for this increase. That will come later today when the House considers a continuing resolution to keep the government running for another 10 weeks. Buried in the CR is a provision that allows the VA to play a shell game within their budget to pay for the Denver project. Now, we all believe that veterans everywhere, including in Denver, should have access to the best health care possible. But the funds for the Denver project should not come at the expense of veterans in Nevada and in other parts of the country. Nonetheless, the VA has identified the $600 million to pay for the Denver facility, and it says that these specific cuts are designed to, and I quote, minimize the impact on veterans. Well, this couldn't be further from the truth, and it ignores reality. It's the epitome of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Let me remind you that in the summer of 2014, we passed an Emergency Choice Act of some $15 billion to help the VA with the health care backlog. Then the VA came back to us this summer and said they would have to close hospitals if we didn't allow them to move some money out of the Choice Act. Then the VA came back and said they needed $200 million just to keep the Denver project going for a while. And now the VA is saying, oh, no problem, we can just move $600 million out of existing programs so we can help Denver without it hurting veterans. How can they possibly do this? The VA, I can tell you, they have proposed cutting IT services, despite the fact that many of their IT systems are 30 years old and need to be replaced. They want to cut funds for a program that helps recruit and retain the best personnel to serve veterans at a time when they are struggling to recruit and retain qualified employees, including specialists and doctors. They want to cut 8 construction projects around the country, from operating rooms to a dialysis center. Now, how can you say these cuts won't hurt veterans? Now, we know a thing or two about sure things in Las Vegas. Well, I can tell you it's a sure thing that soon enough the VA will be coming back to Congress proclaiming yet another doomsday if we don't refill these accounts that they are now robbing. So, I say to you, Congress needs to do its job and actually pay for what we've bought. Wars are expensive. We need to recognize that. We can't keep playing budget games and nickel and dime the services that the brave men and women who fought in these wars need and deserve when they come home. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, there's been one person that's been in the forefront of this entire fight, looking at the cost overruns, the mismanagement, and trying to keep this project on schedule. The gentleman from Denver, Mr. Kaufman, an able co-chair of the committee, for 2 minutes.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to voice my support for the Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorities Act of 2015. This legislation will continue numerous programs of critical importance to our nation's veterans, including a pilot program to increase women veterans' access to health care, nursing home care authorities, and measures to combat veteran homelessness. I am proud that this legislation will allow for the completion of the VA Replacement Hospital in Aurora, Colorado, an absolutely critical project which will serve veterans not just in Colorado, but also in Utah, Montana, Wyoming, and parts of 4 other states. In spite of the incredible mismanagement of this project by the VA and a shocking lack of accountability for those responsible, completing the hospital in Aurora has been my #1 legislative priority. We must not punish our nation's veterans for the sins of incompetent VA bureaucrats. Finally, this bill would accomplish a goal that I've worked towards for over a year, getting the VA out of the major construction business once and for all. For decades, the Government Accountability Office has highlighted enormous construction management deficiencies by the VA. After the GAO highlighted hundreds of millions in cost overruns in April of 2013, the House passed my legislation, which would have handled over the worst VA projects to experts at the Army Corps of Engineers. Worse, billions of dollars have been wasted by VA on mismanaged construction projects, which could have gone instead towards veterans' health care and benefits. I am proud that this bill will finally leave the construction management of large projects to the experts, organizations like the Army Corps of Engineers, and allow VA to focus back to its core competencies, providing health care and benefits to our veterans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Sure. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Yes, I would like to yield to the gentleman who really can give us a little institutional memory on the Denver Regional Hospital. The gentleman from Denver who's been at the forefront of this hospital and this regional problem from the beginning, Mr. Perlmutter. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for yielding me time. I want to thank the chairman of the committee for bringing Senate Bill 2082 to the floor for debate and hearing today. I rise today to support Senate Bill 2082, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorities Act. The legislation before us passed the Senate unanimously last week and is important for a number of VA programs our veterans rely on day in and day out. In addition to these important VA extensions, this legislation will authorize
completion of the VA Medical Center under construction in Aurora, Colorado. This center is part of a major medical campus that includes the University of Colorado Medical School as well as Children's Hospital of Denver. The professors at the University of Colorado are also many of the doctors at the VA Medical Center, and the center will include a full range of medical, laboratory, research, and counseling services, as well as a 30-bed spinal cord injury unit serving hundreds of thousands of veterans throughout the Rocky Mountain West. As the chairman mentioned, genesis began under President Clinton in 1999 with the Secretary of VA at that time. Under George Bush, it went through 4 secretaries of the VA, and under President Obama, now 2 VA secretaries. It is moving forward, and with this bill, will continue to move forward. There is no doubt the VA mismanaged this project from the start. And as disappointing and unacceptable as this situation has been, we are where we are, and under the leadership of Secretary McDonald and Deputy Secretary Gibson, the VA has admitted their mistakes on this project, and they are both personally involved in completion of this facility. Today, construction continues on the project in earnest. The facility is more than 50% complete, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been brought in to oversee completion of the medical center. Bringing in the Army Corps is important so we, as a Congress, can be certain that any additional funds spent on this project are spent appropriately and the facility is completed without further delay. The contractor, Kiewit Turner, and subcontractors have shown tremendous commitment to our nation's veterans by building a world-class facility, and I am confident they will deliver this facility to our veterans throughout the Rocky Mountain West. This bill requires the VA to use a non-VA federal entity like the Army Corps to complete major construction projects valued over $100 million. This is critically important towards ensuring accountability and preventing these large projects from being mismanaged again. I want to thank Mr. Miller and Ms. Brown, as well as Congressman Charlie Dent and Bishop, for their work with me and Mr. Kaufman, who now represents the district. There has been a great deal of anger at the VA recently, and much of it is well-deserved. But through the help of the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Appropriations Committee, Rocky Mountain veterans will eventually see this medical center completed and receive the health care that they earned by service to the United States of America. And with that, I yield back, and I thank my friend from Florida.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I thank Mr. Perlmutter for working so closely with Mr. Kaufman, a true bipartisan effort to see this project to completion. Mr. Speaker, I would ask, how much time do I have left remaining?
The gentleman from Florida has 1.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, might I inquire from Ms. Brown if she would yield 3 minutes of her time?
Yes, sir. I was trying to find out how much time.
The gentlelady from Florida has 9 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I have 9 minutes, and I have no further speakers, so you can have as much time as you and your side needs to consume.
We would ask for 5 minutes. 5 minutes? I yield you 5 minutes, sir. Thank you very much.
The gentlelady yields 5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida. And the
Mr. Speaker, I am now pleased to introduce a member of the committee that has worked very hard on this particular issue, especially the Expiring Authorities Bill, the chairman of a committee, Mr. Abraham from Louisiana, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I will stand today in support of Bill 2082. However, I would like to note that I am also deeply disappointed that we are not voting on the House bills, which would have limited awards and bonuses to VA employees. It is my belief that we have missed an opportunity to bring much-needed accountability to the VA, and know that I will work tirelessly to bring accountability to the VA for the American people. Senate Bill 2082, also known as the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Act of 2015, includes multiple necessary provisions supporting our nation's heroes, including veterans who are homeless, disabled, or suffering from PTSD. As chairman of the VA Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, I introduced a particular provision in 2082 to extend contract exams for veterans applying for disability benefits. Extending contract exams is a common sense measure to cut through the bureaucratic red tape and ensure our veterans are getting the care they need when they need it. Many veterans undergo a VA medical examination in support of their application for disability benefits. The problem is that there are not enough examiners to perform these evaluations in a timely manner in the VA system. Expanding contract exams will make it easier for the VA to arrange for the veterans to get disability examinations by permitting a licensed physician to conduct these examinations anywhere in the United States as long as the doctor is under a VA contract. This is common sense, and I urge passage of the bill. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back.
Sir.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have one more person that has requested time. The former chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, a stalwart supporter of America's veterans. I recognize for 2 minutes.
Without objection, the gentleman
I want to thank my good friend
from New Jersey
for
is
yielding. I want
recognized.
to thank Corrine Brown for her courtesy. Mr. Speaker, I served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee for a quarter of a century, including stints as vice chairman and full committee chair, and I believe that our nation's veterans are fortunate to have a great champion with you, Chairman Miller, at the helm. Chairman Miller has led the committee with aggressive oversight and accountability of the often troubled department. He has shepherded numerous bills into law, including the VA Choice Program, which expands timely and local access to health care for veterans, and working so closely in a bipartisan way with Ranking Member Brown, ensured that the VA has the resources and the authorities to meet evolving needs. You always, Mr. Chairman, put veterans first and their dependents. Chairman Miller had explained the bill. I'll just take a brief moment to comment on Title III. Title III reauthorizes a number of provisions from a law that I wrote back in 2001, known as the Homeless Veterans Comprehensive Assistance Act, or Public Law 107/95. That law established the grant programs that included female veterans, homeless veterans with special needs, children with serious mental illnesses, and incarcerated veterans. The Act authorized dental care. We learned through our hearing process you don't get a job with broken teeth. It certainly affects your digestion, and oral health was critical. We put that into the bill. Job training and expanded domiciliary care programs. It also authorized the Advisory Committee on Homeless Veterans and launched the national goal, which has now been replicated since 2010, in attempting to end chronic homelessness. We also did the Labor's Homeless Reintegration Program, a HUD-VASH program. The proof of the pudding is in 2001, the estimations from VA was 300,000 veterans who were homeless at some time during that year. By fiscal year 2013, that number had decreased to approximately 140,000 veterans. Of course, we have a different, also alternate way of calculating. Unfortunately, on any given night, 50,000 veterans are still on the street. This legislation will go far and do much so that no veteran is on the street and suffering homelessness. We need to bring them back into society. And again, Chairman Miller, thank you for your extraordinary leadership.
The time of the gentleman from New Jersey has expired. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves.
In closing.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized to close debate on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleague to join me in supporting Senate Bill 2082 and send this important bill to the President so that vital programs helping our veterans continue past the end of this fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Miller, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Florida has yielded back her time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I want to thank Ranking Member Brown for his courtesy of giving an additional few minutes for some of our members who wanted to speak. I, too, think it's very important that we pass this piece of legislation today, but our job here is not finished. We must ensure that the appropriators now do their job and make sure that VA doesn't, as Ms. Titus said, rob Peter to pay Paul. It's important that we not take necessary dollars away from veteran health care in order to pay for their massive mismanagement of this particular facility. I urge a positive vote on this Senate bill and yield back my time.
The gentleman from Florida has yielded back the balance of his time, all time having now expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 2082? Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The
Mr. Speaker,
from Florida is recognized.
On that, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed.